Hi, I'm Dr. David Perl from limerence.net. If you're able to, I would really like you to be able to like these videos that I'm doing and also subscribe. It's so important because the only way that we're going to get more awareness about limerence is by people spreading the word. And until we can start getting more people to spread the word and to talk about this condition, that's the only way that we're going to start lessening the shame that people feel around being limerent. And for me, being limerent is just part of being human being. There's nothing wrong in it. There's no shame in it. And we have to help people more with this. Anyhow, this video is about disclosure. Should I disclose? And it's one of the most debated topics on the forum, on the limerence.net forums. And I've come up with a matrix to try and simplify this issue. I think that, and part of the reason why is because limerence is a term that I think is being misused in some places. Many people are using the word limerence to describe what I would call new relationship energy. It's that normal phase of falling in love with another person when we first meet them, and is an evolutionary mechanism to get us to pair bond and procreate and to keep the species going. Now, if you read Dorothy Tenov's book, the woman who first described limerence back in the 1970s, I think what she described was a condition whereby this becomes caught in an obsessive cycle or loop because we are unable to consummate the relationship. We can't crystallize it. And often that is because we are in a committed relationship elsewhere, or maybe our limerent object is in a committed relationship, or there could be other barriers to consummating the relationship. So I've come up initially with this matrix of 4 boxes, and on the top scale we have whether you are in a long-term relationship or whether you're not in a long-term relationship. And then the 2 boxes going down the side are if your limerent object is in a long-term relationship or if they are not in a long-term relationship. It's quite simple to look in the 4 boxes and see which one we fall into initially. If we're in a long-term relationship and our limerent object is in a long-term relationship, then disclosure is never appropriate. And I'm going to talk about that more after I've gone through the 4 boxes. If you're not in a long-term relationship and your limerent object is not in a long-term relationship, then disclosure is appropriate. I appreciate there could be many reasons why disclosing might be difficult, and I know when I think back to my earlier years of dating how difficult it was when I was attracted to a woman, how I would find it so hard to initiate a move or make a move to ask her out or whatever it was to show her that I was attractive. That was more to do with my own insecurities and lack of self-belief. However, if you're both free for a relationship, disclosure, not necessarily of your feelings of limerence because they could scare somebody off, but certainly disclosing about liking somebody would be appropriate. Now let's look at the bottom left box where you're in a long-term relationship, however your limerent object is not in a long-term relationship. Now again, this one can be covered really quickly. It's not appropriate to disclose to your limerent object. What in an ideal world you do is either work through your feelings towards your limerent object, but also to try and understand why is it that you're being pulled to somebody else as opposed to your significant other. What's going on in the relationship? Now, it may be that there's issues that need addressing in that relationship. Often what Ruth and I see in the couples practice that we run is that people fear conflict and therefore they don't talk about just growing apart or lack of attraction to their partner, or the sexual chemistry is gone. Could be many reasons why, but the fear of upsetting our partners makes it difficult for us to communicate that. And we bury those feelings, we suppress them. And then what happens is that, as Freud said, we're pulled towards something we're attracted to, or we're pushed away from something we don't like. And with limerence, and certainly how affairs usually start, is that we're pushed away from our partners because we've grown apart, we no longer feel attracted to them, or we no longer like them, or we have built up a whole bag of resentments. And then along comes something that attracts us and we're pulled towards that. And that's how most affairs start. In that case, as I said, though, it's much better to work through your issues if you're in a good... And sometimes limerence can start where our primary relationship is okay. It's more to do with perhaps stuff inside of us, you know, and there's much talk about why are some people prone to getting limerence. If that's the case, that your primary relationship is fairly good, then maybe it's not appropriate to disclose to your significant other either. And I have done a video about this on the online training series, specifically about disclosure to our significant other and the pitfalls and the pros and cons. So that leaves one more box, and that is the one where perhaps it's a bit more questionable and not so clear, where you're not in a long-term relationship, you're free to date, however your limerent object is in a long-term relationship. It's difficult because in an ideal world, your limerent object will be working on trying to work out the issues in their primary relationship and why that's grown apart. And if they've decided that that relationship is not working, much better that they leave that rather than deceive and lie and cheat on their partner and then free themselves up so that then they're no longer in a long-term relationship. They move down then into the bottom right box and you're both free to consummate the relationship. By you disclosing your feelings to somebody who's in a long-term relationship, it can, I don't know, it just can make things messy. It can complicate things. Is it unfairly putting them into a difficult situation? Let's say there is fractures in their marriage or their long-term relationship already, and then you disclose your attraction towards them. It might make them more prone or more inclined to pursue that relationship with you and to deceive their partner. And deception is never good. It's never good. I mean, what is an affair? I think the best definition of an affair is where we're not honest with our partners, with our significant others. We're keeping secrets. Now, keeping secrets of what we think and feel in our head, I think is appropriate and fine. Our significant others do not need to know everything that goes on in our head. But behaviors, when we start acting on those things, that's when we're going to get into trouble. And I think ideally we should be honest with our behaviors. And if we're deceiving our partners by acting out through these feelings and pursuing our limerent object, then that is, by Esther Perel's definition, an affair. And I would agree with that. By the way, if you haven't heard of Esther Perel, she's, I think, a brilliant lady who's a couples counselor, written a couple of books, one on mating on captivity, and her latest one is all about affairs. It's called The State of Affairs. And she takes a really compassionate, balanced, nuanced view of affairs, and I will recommend that book. I'll put a link to it at the bottom in the description. So let's go back now to disclosure where you're in a long-term relationship and your limerent object is in a long-term relationship. Why is disclosure never good? Well, in that case, the limerence, again, it comes back to you. I think the limerence is your issue. It's your struggles, your internal issues, and much better for you to work on those than to project out those feelings onto another person who really you don't know much about. And I know when I disclosed my limerence, I didn't really know much about my limerent object and her own history and the impact it had on her. I was clueless as to the impact it had on her when I did disclose. And I'm making this video, it was prompted by this morning I came across some feedback that my clinical supervisor gave me when I made one of my disclosures many years ago when I first got limerence. And this is what he wrote, and I want to share it because at the time I got quite angry with it. But when I read it this morning, even though it's more than a decade old, I could still feel the feelings of shame with that disclosure, the feelings of just embarrassment, of being stupid, of not being able to contain my feelings, and how it would have been far more emotionally mature had I just not disclosed my feelings in that situation where I felt like I was pushed into a corner. And what he wrote was this: you had an interesting 6 months where decisions were made unilaterally that with a bit more thought could have been handled differently. I hope and believe that you have learned from these experiences and are continuing to take the questions and lessons these experiences raise to both your private supervision and to therapy, as I strongly believe they happen for a reason. he was so right, and I did take them to therapy. I did take them to my own supervision, and I did far more work on that compulsion to disclose. And I think that's why we have this need to disclose. It's like it's part of the OCD, part of the compulsion that we feel with limerence. And I think part of it is because we find it really hard to sit with conflicted feelings inside of us. This is what we call the cognitive dissonance that goes on with limerence. And cognitive dissonance refers to a situation involving conflicting attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors. This produces a feeling of mental discomfort, leading to an alteration in one of the attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors to reduce the discomfort and restore balance. So what happens with limerence is we have this overwhelming feeling of attraction, love, lust, whatever you want to call it, towards our limerent object. And yet we know that at some level something's not quite right, because we're not in a relationship. It's a fantasy relationship with our limerent object. And this goes back to the difference between new relationship energy, where you might be in a relationship and there's all that energy and insecurity, because desire is where attraction meets uncertainty. And in the early days, weeks, months of a relationship, there's a lot of uncertainty still. That fuels the attraction. But what happens with limerence is that uncertainty, we get caught in the loop of uncertainty, as I said before, because we can't go and crystallize the relationship. We can't pursue it, or if we do, there's going to be big consequences because we're cheating on our partners, on our families. So what happens is that we want to try and get rid of this conflicted feeling, where on one hand we know that it's wrong because we would be betraying our partners, and on the other hand we have this overwhelming feeling. So what do? To try and alleviate that conflict, we disclose our feelings, thinking that that's going to be a way out of there. I think there's another reason as well, and that comes down to maybe the drama triangle, where we want to perhaps rescue our limerent object if they're playing the victim. Again, I've done a victim on the drama triangle in the online video series, and I really encourage you to understand the drama triangle, because it plays out in every single dysfunctional relationship, and limerence is a dysfunctional relationship. And I know, again, for me, I very much was playing the white knight wanting to rescue my limerent object, who in my judgment was playing the victim. It's a lose-lose situation. It's a triangular relationship. And again, the same supervisor was the one who marked my second year paper, where I talked more about limerence, and he pointed out to me the drama triangle as part of his feedback. And this was 12 months after he wrote that initial comment. After my first disclosure, he says, "As for the infatuation, you don't say where this is at the moment, so I will assume it is still ongoing. If so, then another area I would ask you to consider, amongst the many other ways of looking at this, which I'm sure you are aware of, is to maybe view this as a triangle between yourself, your wife, and the infatuant, a made-up word I know, by which he means the limerent object. There may be something about giving to this third party something of yourself that you are protecting from your wife, your own love avoidant part perhaps. Or maybe this is a repeat of your father's triad, where he feels he can't be fully present for his wife, so he has his own infatuation with another woman, and you are repeating his pattern. There is no simple answer to this dilemma, I know, but do keep looking at this. But one thing I would encourage is that you hold your boundary with regard to the other woman. Like your therapist, I agree that she doesn't really need to know much about this, and to want to work this through with her carries with it unconscious undertones of, I want you to reciprocate. If it didn't, then why would she need to know anything about it? And I think, again, that's really poignant words, because he's right. I mean, by disclosing, in a way, we are wanting to pursue the relationship as well. It's not just about trying to resolve this cognitive dissonance. It is about wanting to pursue the relationship with our limerent object and to crystallize it. So that's just an overview of disclosure, some more thoughts that keep evolving with time. You can see that feedback was written in 2013, so quite some time later, I'm still trying to pull all these threads together, and I am starting to believe that at the core of limerence for many of us is that it's probably partly genetic. If we look at the links between limerence and having Aspie traits, I think there is a correlation there, not a hard connection. And we know that autism has some genetic element to it. And I am beginning to wonder whether with limerence as well, whether part of it is genetic or maybe epigenetic, where the environment switches on certain genes that make us prone to that. And as my supervisor said, that I was repeating the pattern with my father with his own triangular relationship between the woman that he had an infatuation with, whilst my mother was descending into her dementia. Hope you find this useful. As I said at the beginning, please like, please subscribe if you can, and keep safe out there.